am recording. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Frances Queller. I'm so happy that you're listening to this webinar. This is about the path to law school. As an attorney myself, I really had to learn about the journey to law school so much independently. It was really hard, really hard. So I had no Jeff, and I definitely did not have the guidance, the wisdom, or the mentorship that Jeff provides. So none of that. So this webinar is really a great opportunity to give back. It's a great way to tell everyone, you know, there is a path. And I remember when I told people that I want to go to law school, no one I really was close to was a lawyer. So more people told me, don't do it than do it. And no one actually showed me the way. So Jeff is going to kind of show you what, you know, not just what the LSAT is. I actually didn't even know what the LSAT was. Like, I really was just blind to the whole testing process with law school admissions. I didn't really know what the law school application looked like until I myself applied to law school. I just want you to know that I'm really happy that we're doing this webinar, and I did not have a Jeff 20 years ago in my life to guide me and tell me. So I'm really just very thankful right now that here you are, and here we are recording. Who would have ever thought that during a pandemic, here we are with an opportunity to just like share wisdom on a Zoom recording. So with that being said, our youngest audience member is listening here. So hello, my little audience member. All right. And Jeff, you're going to lead the way. Thank you so much, Jeff. If you could share some wisdom about yourself and let me know if you have any issues with the share screen. But I think we're good to go. Do you want to start the share screen now, or do you want to test it now, or do you want to get started?
Well, yeah, let me try. Let me try the share screen. This is just an LSAT that I was gonna use.
I think that's great. Good.
Does that look good?
Yep.
You can see that, right?
So I think we're good. Good. Just to make sure the share screen's working. Okay, excellent. So I'm quickly just looking at the chat box. We have a nice range. Okay. So we have from high school senior to, I see
Sophomores, yeah.
Sophomore. Yeah, I mean, it's a nice range. And then we have a very young member in the audience as well, who I'm going to mute right now. So
who is also finishing up high school, correct? I believe so.
So let's go from there. Jeff, thank you so much for doing this. Okay, we're looking forward. Enjoy.
So, hello. I wish I could hear everybody. Welcome. My name is Jeff, obviously, as Frances said several times. And I am an attorney, but I do lots and lots of law school admissions test tutoring and teaching. I also help students with applications for law school. In particular, I help them with personal statements, which are a little bit different than what you're going to be doing for college. Those of you that are getting ready to go to college, there's a personal statement for that application too. But it's a little different because for law school, there is no common app as there is for college. College, you do one application that works for a lot of schools. But in law school, they all potentially do their own thing. So it's all different, and we have to tailor the applications for the schools. I graduated from law school quite some time ago, although I did grow up in New York. I went to Hunter High School, grew up in Queens, went to Hunter High School, and I ended up going to NYU Law School for law school. Graduated a while ago, and really, I really just enjoy. I've been doing the tutoring for the LSAT for about 12 years now, and so I just really enjoy working with students. And the test is always going on every year. It used to be 4 times a year. Now it's about 9 times a year that they will offer the test. So it's I keep meeting new students, and which is a lot of fun for me. Are you there, Frances?
Yes, I'm here in the backdrop.
Did you want me to cover anything specific at this, to start?
I think, go right ahead and we'll get started. If you want, I think let's just start kind of from the beginning. Like, what is just kind of just to get started with those considering law school will have to explore taking the LSAT. So I think, can we dive into the exam?
Sure. So I noticed that some of you are definitely interested that you're in law. It's going to be a little while before you're applying to law school, but the test is very sort of frightening to some people. There's a lot going on in the law school test. It's very different from the SATs or the ACTs. About the only similarity is there's 2 similarities. One is that it's a multiple choice test. Second is that there is a reading comp section, which is something that you've all seen. It's just much harder reading comp than what you would get on the SAT. The other parts of the test that people really need to learn how to sort of navigate. One part is called logical reasoning. I'm going to start. I'm going to show you some of those questions. You get an idea as to just what it's all about. The other one is called logic games. Now, logic games, I actually are not going to matter for you guys, those of you who end up applying to law school, because those are going to be removed from the test within the next several years. But let's start with a little bit of logical reasoning, and I'm going to share my screen and just give you an example of a real test from a number of years ago. And as you can see in this section of the test, there's a lot of paragraphs and then they will ask you questions about the paragraph that you read. There are a lot of different types of questions that they will ask. So if you look at the beginning of this section, if you look at question number 1, they're asking you to find an answer that has a similar flaw to the reasoning in the paragraph itself. There's number 3. They're asking you to describe the method of reasoning. Number 2, they're asking you to find an assumption required by the argument. This is all this is stuff that we generally don't talk too much about in terms of argumentation and describing arguments and talking about what's wrong with arguments. But obviously, these are the kinds of things that lawyers need to be good at. You have to have a very logical mind to be a successful lawyer, and you have to be very critical of language. And when people make arguments, particularly opposing counsel making arguments, you have to be ready to try to poke holes in their arguments. And this test, while it's not a guarantee of being a good lawyer, it certainly sort of focuses on the kinds of things that lawyers need to be good at. So one question that I did want to maybe sort of show you was coming up. Number 7. You guys see number 7 over here? In 1955, legislation in a certain country gave the government increased control over industrial workplace safety conditions. Among the high-risk industries in that country, the likelihood that a worker will suffer a serious injury has decreased since 1955. The legislation, therefore, has increased overall worker safety within high-risk industries. And the question is, which of the following, if true, most weakens the argument above? This is one of the more common types of questions on the LSAT. It's called a weaken question. They're asking you to weaken the argument. The first step is to understand what the actual argument is, which means we need to figure out what the conclusion of the argument is. And there are going to be words that are going to help us a lot of times to do that. This one, the word therefore, is a big tip-off that you have a conclusion. So they're saying the legislation has increased worker safety within high-risk industries. But we're trying to weaken that. So we're trying to find an answer that would help to suggest in some way that it wasn't the legislation that led to increased worker safety. They told us that the likelihood of a serious injury has gone down. They told us that. They think, the author of this argument thinks that it was the legislation that the government passed that led to that. But we're trying to poke holes in that. One participant, a very young participant.
So oh my goodness, sorry guys. Sorry, Jeff.
When we look at the answers.
Go ahead, guys.
I'm going to just go through the answers quickly.
Well, he thinks it's funny, Jeff. That's good news. He thinks it's funny.
That's great. It must be my similar bald head. It must be that.
I'm muting myself. Bye, everybody.
Okay. So some of these answers are not going to really address the question as to whether or not there was the legislation that led to more safety for these workers. An answer like that would be B. Take a look at B, which says most of the work-related injuries that occurred before 1955 were the result of worker carelessness. Well, that was before 1955. The legislation happened in 1955, and the legislation may have dealt with that, may have taken care of worker carelessness, may have, instituted standards and things like that. So this doesn't really help us with what happened after 1955. Some people like C for this question. The annual number of work-related injuries has increased since the legislation took effect. This answer is not the correct answer because even though it's saying that the number of injuries in at work has gone up, it doesn't affect the statement that they made that in high-risk industries, worker safety has increased. Likelihood of serious injury has gone down. So that's a very attractive answer, but it doesn't address the specific situation that they gave us. The answer for this one, if you haven't figured it out already, some of you may have been reading it, is A. Because of technological innovation, most workplaces in the high-risk industries do not require as much unprotected interaction between workers and heavy machinery as they did in 1955. And that's going to be the answer because that's going to give us a different reason for the reduction of injuries. If the workers are not interacting with heavy machinery as much as they did before, that might well be the reason that safety has increased, and it doesn't have to necessarily be the legislation that did it. So this is a pretty standard kind of a question, and the analysis that we would use for this kind of question is very common, and that's how we have to think very carefully about everything we read on this test. Every word can be important, and even when answers look very interesting, there are a lot of reasons they can be wrong. Does anybody have any specific comments or questions? Let me find where's my chat screen? I want to find the chat. Where's the chat?
And then Jeff, we also want to look at the application. So whatever you're planning. So we're going to check that out.
And sorry about the little giggling object nearby.
Now for applications, and this is, that was just one taste of the LSAT. But it takes several months at least of very serious practicing and study to really feel like you've gotten as good as you're going to get at taking the LSAT. There's a lot of different question types, a lot of reading comp. The logic game section still exists, and it is somewhat challenging. In terms of the applications, as I mentioned before, can vary between different schools. Most of them will ask for a lot of standard information, like what's your name, and tell us some information about your parents' background, and obviously education. And you're going to give them your resume, and you're going to discuss probably extracurricular things that you did, but they can ask somewhat different questions between them. Francis, actually don't have an application because they're all available through the LSAC website. LSAC is the company that administers the LSAT, and it is also the place where you would do all of your applications electronically, and you need to go in there with an account and get them. And the applications are not available right now because the season's coming up. The applications start in September. The biggest thing, though, about the application is probably the personal statement, as I mentioned before. And personal statements for law school are not simply a question of, tell us something, like, come up with a story like you might have done or you might be getting ready to do for college, or give me something, some great creative writing piece as you might do for college. For law school applications, the personal statement is really an opportunity to show law schools something about yourself that is not apparent from other parts of your application, that we hope is going to make the law school want you to come be a student at their school, in their law school class. And there's a lot of things that can sort of contribute to being to making a successful personal statement. It doesn't have to be about why you want to go to law school, although it could be. A lot of people don't have a really amazing, exciting reason for law school. They just like the idea of that kind of intellectual study and argumentation and things like that. Some people have, much more sort of strong reasons for wanting to go to law school. So that's one type of personal statement. But other personal statements can talk about academics. Law schools love when you talk about academics. If there was, some particular classes that you took in college that were extremely interesting and sort of led you to do more research and maybe even write a thesis about it. That's the kind of thing that law schools love to hear about, the sort of the inner workings of the minds of students, especially ones that have done a lot of serious academic study and research and things like that. They love that kind of thing. On the other hand, you could write a personal statement about an incredible book that you read that was very meaningful to you. And law schools, when they give you sort of these prompts for the personal statements, it's pretty clear that it's very open-ended. Most law schools will say something along the lines of, here's your chance to tell us something about yourself. You could write about this, you could write about that, but ultimately the choice is yours. And it's very, very open-ended. And that's one of the reasons a lot of people do come to me for help with the personal statement, because they don't really know where to get going with it. And what I would do is I would talk to a student at length and sort of talk about their background and talk about their academics, but also their extracurriculars, and try to figure out what's the strongest sort of road in terms of presenting the student in the best possible way in the personal statement. There are really a lot of ways to do it. Other things that come up in applications would be occasionally schools will ask you to tell them why you're interested in that school. Some schools have extra optional essays. For example, describe an ethical dilemma that you have faced and how it got resolved. So there's really all kinds of things that we might run into in terms of law school applications. Now, I know everybody here, I think, is in high school. So some of you may be wondering what you need to do to go to law school. Is that a question some people have? I think a couple people have put in some comments. A lot of people are not sure about that. What I'm happy to tell you is that it's not like being a doctor. If you're going to be a doctor, you have to be pre-med, you have to take a ton of science courses, and it's very grueling, and it's a very specific kind of curriculum. When it comes to law school, there is no specific courses that you have to take as an undergrad in college. You can literally take anything you like and still apply to law school. You can choose any major you like and still apply to law school. In fact, law schools kind of like people that are coming out of somewhat different backgrounds from other people, in terms of not just social backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds, but also academic backgrounds. So I was an English major. A lot of people that go to law school are political science majors, but I've worked with students that were math majors, philosophy majors, which law schools really find that very interesting. I've worked with engineering majors. I've worked with business majors. Everybody, there's reasons why everybody can be successful in law school, and that sort of highlights the fact that there is no one set career path if you go to law school. There's so many different things you can do with a law degree, and that's, Frances is such a great example of that. Frances is a lawyer, but she's running a test prep business. Do you need to be a lawyer to do that?
Thank you so much for adding that, Jeff. I really appreciate it. And I want to also just remind everyone, even though I don't practice traditional, I don't put on a suit, I don't go to court, I literally use the knowledge from my law degree every single day. My employment agreements, my contracts, my non-solicitations, oh my God, my lease. I went through my lease the other day with a fine-tooth comb because I had some issues about who should be paying for something very expensive for the business. And I literally went super legal on them. And I'm just saying, my degrees really come in handy, so much. People introduce me as a lawyer, and then they say, it's really interesting because they introduce me as a lawyer who runs a tutoring center. So my degree is what people talk about before they talk about everything. I was she's a lawyer who runs a tutoring center. And I noticed school principals would introduce me that way as well. So you'll hear your professional degree sometimes before you even hear your name, like lawyer Jeff. Okay, go ahead.
And that's what law school teaches everybody, is how to analyze language and arguments and sentences, and that means that's going to help you with contracts. That's going to help you with just understanding really anything that's going on. I mean, you might watch the news and you might hear them say something that's legal related, and you might decide, I'm going to figure out what that's really about. And you go to law school, you're going to have the skills that will enable you to really understand a lot of the big issues that face us every day and we hear about on TV and things like that. And just from a practical matter, as Frances mentioned, just employment contracts. There's all when you're going to rent an apartment and you want to sign a lease, it always helps to have that law degree. And you might find some things in the lease, or want to put some things in the lease that weren't there, and you might have to have a little negotiation with the potential landlord. It just gives you so much more of a position of power in a lot of dealings every day that really affect us very deeply and financially and all that. So it's really great to have this kind of background. So that the point there is that like law is good for anything you want to do. Having the law degree is always going to be great. I noticed a question from Joshua Carson. You're in college, so welcome. You're thinking about law school and the LSAT. Tips for performance on the LSAT, he has asked about. Well, one of the important tips probably is to figure out what's going to be the best sort of materials for you to use, and decide if you need personal tutoring, or if you're going to try to do self-study, or if you're going to take a course. There are a lot of different options. Certainly that's the kind of thing Francis and I are happy to talk to you about, probably separately. I know not everyone else here is in the same position as you are right now, Joshua, but happy to chat further about that. There are a lot of options. I do a lot of individual one-on-one tutoring, but I also teach classes. For Francis, I've taught classes for other companies in the past too. And a lot of ways that you can go with that. But it is important to get some kind of structured understanding of the LSAT. Unless you take a practice test and you discover that you're already, at the top like 1%, there are some people like that. But most of the rest of us need to do some kind of study, take a course or get some instruction to really navigate the LSAT exceptionally well. Francis, what do you think? Where else should we go from here?
What are some of your favorite essays that you've had so far? What are some of your favorite topics?
Well, this is a really good question. So I've worked on so many different kinds of essays. One that I worked on recently that was just particularly memorable to me was a young woman who was out of college for a couple of years, but she was doing like genetics research, and her story was basically about how she figured out she wanted to go to law school, and she went to some kind of like panel discussion, and it was genetic research stuff, but legal issues came up, and she just sort of got sucked into it. That was a really great one. Another one that was really memorable was I had one student who was a philosophy major in college, and philosophy majors tend to look at the world in a certain kind of a way. And I was chatting with him for a while, and we were just trying to figure out like what would be a great thing to sort of talk about. And I noticed on his resume that the previous summer he had worked at P.F. Chang's. We don't really have those in New York, but it's like a chain restaurant that you find in malls that's basically sort of Asian, like Americanized Asian. P.F. Chang's. So he worked one summer. He was down like in Washington D.C. He worked at P.F. Chang's, and I started talking to him about like, what was it like to work at P.F. Chang's? That seems like a sort of ordinary kind of a job for the summer. And he said, well, I thought it was so interesting because, and he started telling me how he was viewing like the different people that worked there and the whole experience from the point of view of some of his favorite philosophers. And he's like, well, this person was a great example of what I forget which philosopher, like Jeremy Bentham's idea about this, and this other sort of situation was like Carl Jung, and like I was like, wow, man, this is too deep for me, but this is going to be a great personal statement for law school. You got to write about this. This is awesome, and that was a very successful statement. Other ones that have, they sort of range, they go across the board. I mean, there's all kinds of statements. When I work with business majors, I worked with a business major one time, and she ended up writing about how she was part of like this big, I guess, capstone project in college. She was put in charge of this big group of people. They weren't necessarily all business majors, but they were in the class. And she basically talked about how she had to navigate, she had to learn how to deal with different personalities because there were jocks from the football team, and there were like, I think a couple of musicians were in that group, and it was all these very different personalities. And she wrote about how she managed to get them all to work together, which was good. I had one not that long ago. It was this guy who went to, oh man, what was he doing? He went to South America to help save a certain kind of animal. I don't think it was whales, but it was something like that. It was, all kinds of experiences that people have could potentially be great grounds for a personal statement. So, what do you think, Francis?
So guys, do you want to type in any questions that you have right now? And can you show us what a game section looks like on the LSAT?
Yes,
Let's go back to the LSAT.
Sure. I'm pulling up the games. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So this is what I mentioned before. This is the logic games section. Something that most people need to learn how to deal with. It's not the kind of thing that most people do for fun in their spare time. But games, there are a lot of different types of them, but every LSAT at the moment, there's a section with games. There's 4 games in each section, and this first one here, questions 1 to 6, is an example of a logic game. And our challenge here, what we're trying to do is, we're figuring out what they're asking about, and what we're going to do is we're going to diagram things that they tell us in the beginning to help us try to figure out what's going on with, and what you're going to have is a bunch of variables, usually a bunch of people, and we're either going to be putting them in some kind of order or in some kind of grouping situation. So if you look at this, right, we have 6 law students. There are 6 law students, GLMRSV. Always easier to use just the first letter. So we have GLMRSV. And they're telling us there's a class, and each class is divided into 3 teams, team 1, team 2, team 3, 2 students each team. So this sounds like it's going to be what's called a grouping game. We're taking the 6 students, we're dividing them up into three teams of 2 each. But they also are telling us that each student prepares either an opening argument or a final argument for their team. So it's an extra bit of information that we have to keep track of. So the way this game would start, I'm going to diagram what they're telling us. So GLMRSV, we're going to have 3 teams, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to have opening argument and final argument. And this game would start off like this. I'm trying to take these variables, I'm trying to figure out where they're going to go on this board. Opening argument, final argument, and these are the team numbers. Not an unusual type of game. This is not it's not the hardest type of game. They can vary in difficulty levels. So now once we have that, once we understand what our diagram is going to look like, we have under the paragraph, they're calling them specifications. We generally would call these rules. These are the rules of the game. So we need to keep track of these rules, and we're going to try to diagram each rule in an effective visual kind of a way. So the first rule is that M is on the same team as either G or V. So that would look like this. M is going to be with one of these, G or V. They're going to be on the same team, which would be they would be vertically in the same column. So that's why that looks like that. What also I have here is this double arrow, because they didn't tell me who's doing an opening argument, who's doing a final argument. So I'm telling myself, this is telling myself that they could switch. M doesn't have to be on top. M could be on the bottom. And the G or V could maybe be on the top. It's like they could swap. This is a nice way of sort of showing it all at one time. Little prepares an opening argument. Now that means I'm gonna put the L right next to the line where it's gonna go. L has to be on that top line. There are other ways to do it, but I think this is a nice, efficient, visual way to do that. And then the next rule is that G or R, but not both, prepare a final argument. what we have to do, what we really want to do when we're working with games and we're looking at rules is really interpret them. You could write what it says, G or R, F, not both. You could write that out. But we always want to think about what these things mean. If one of them has to do a final argument but not both, that means one of them is doing an opening argument too, which means one is opening, one is final. And so what I'm going to do with that, I'm going to put it on my diagram like this. One of them is up here and one of them is down here, and I sort of put them near each other so I don't remember, I don't forget that they're related to each other. It's G or R is up there. So if G is up there, R would be down here. If G is down here, R would be up there. And this is a very useful way of doing it because I'm limiting now the number of available spaces on that top line, which I like very much. And that would be the setup of the game. Setups are, a lot of people, that's like the first thing you really have to learn is like how to set it up, how to diagram it, what should the board look like, how do I do those rules. A lot of rules are going to be very similar. The more tests you do, the more you're going to get used to these rules. And then we take those rules and we try to answer some questions. The first question is usually like this. It's basically a solution to the game. Which of the following could be the composition of each team and the argument for each student? So what would be a solution to the game? And the way we handle this is we just go through the rules one by one and look for things that are wrong for this first question. So I know that little has to be doing an opening argument. That would be an easy rule to deal with. So I'm just looking for little now. So in A, little is doing an opening argument. For B, little is doing a final argument. So I know B is wrong, and I would cross out B on the actual test. C, little is doing an opening argument. D, little is doing an opening argument. E, little is doing an opening argument. Great. So next rule, M. I'm gonna work on this rule. M has to be with G or V on the same team as G or V. So A, M is with V on team 2. So that seems okay. C, we have M with S. That is going to be wrong. So I'm going to cross that out. I would do it on the test. What about D? M is with G. That seems okay. And then E, M is with G again, and that's okay. That satisfies the rule. Next, I know that R and G have to get split between the opening and the final argument. So let's look at A. What's going on with G? G is doing final, and R is doing final. So A is going to be wrong. We'll cross that out. And then D, what about D? We have G doing an opening argument, R doing a final argument. That seems okay. And then for E, I see that G and R are both doing opening arguments. So E is wrong. The answer would be D. For that, that's how we do that first question. One of the things that we want to get really proficient at after that first question is usually pretty easy to handle. But after that, we start going through the questions in the game. We have to understand what the strategies are. There's a lot of strategies that sort of come into play. What we have to do a lot, and really should want to do a lot, is make new diagrams for individual questions because a lot of questions are going to give us specific scenarios to deal with. So number 2, G is on the same team as Mitchum, and G prepares the final argument. Okay, so G is going to be on my bottom line. That's where my final argument is. And Mitchum is going to be on the top line as the opening argument. So it sort of starts like this. Now, you may be wondering, well, how did I know to put it in team 1? He didn't say to put it in team 1. Well, one of the tricks about games is to pay attention. Do we need to worry about the team numbers? The first question did. But in this question, if you look at the answers, they're not asking about team numbers. It's not about team 1 or team 2. And there's no rules about team 1, 2, or 3. So I'm just going to put them on a team. So M and G are on a team like this. Now, before I start looking at answers and start scratching my head, what's going on, I'm going to see what I can figure out based on my rules. So if G is doing the final argument, then I know that R is going to have to do an opening argument. So I'm going to stick R in one of those slots. I also know that L has to do an opening argument. That's a rule. So that's going to go there. And that means I only have 2 people that are left, and they are S and V. And it's really all I have to decide at that point is there any Is there any difference? Are there any rules about them in terms of, restricting where they go? And the answer is no, there isn't. So I'm going to handle it like this. This is how I'm visualizing what's going on here. S and V with the parentheses, which shows that I don't know exactly who goes where, but these are the two variables that have to go in those spaces. So they could switch sort of back and forth. And that's a good diagram. And once I have a good diagram like this, now I can fly through the answers. As opposed to like looking at the answers and trying to decide which one's right. I'm working on my diagram. And Joshua, if you're still there, yeah, I see you are. That's a tip for you right there as far as games goes. So which of the following could be true? So now I'm going to look at the answers, but I'm going to look at my diagram. So A says Little is on the same team as V, who prepares the opening argument. Well, Little can be with V, but V has to do a final argument in this diagram. So it's not going to be A. B says R is with S, who prepares the opening argument. No, R has to do the opening argument. S is doing a final argument. So B is wrong. C has R with S, who prepares the final argument. Yes, that's the answer, because R and S definitely could be on the same team, and S would be preparing the final argument. So that's just a taste of what we are up against in games. There's a lot of different sort of situations that we have to deal with in games. A lot of games are not like this. This is a grouping game. A lot of games involve some kind of ordering situation. This one, for example, this third game on this test is an ordering game. This is some would call it a linear game. Some would call it a sequencing game. It's all about putting things in order. So how do I know that? Well, it's from what they tell me in the paragraph. So Mercotech, they always make up these company names, carried out a study to compare the productivity of its night shift with that of its day shift. Every week, the company's 6 crews were ranked. That's a tip-off. They were ranked from 1st to 6th. Most productive, least productive, 1st to 6th. Very typical beginning to a game on the LSAT. We're putting them in order 1 through 6 in some way. So I would immediately think that my diagram probably needs to look like this. And I'm going to write down my variables, F, G, H, R, S, T. So that's my beginning in this game. And then they tell me something else that's kind of unusual. For any week, either G and T were the night shift crews, or S and H were the night shift crews. Well, I don't know what that really means yet, but I do need to keep track of that. So I'm just going to do this. Night shift is either GT or SH. So I'm just going to make a little note for myself like that. Little N for night shift. And then I see these rules, and these rules are very common, very typical in games. And for most people, these become pretty easy to deal with after you've started to learn about them. And I'm just going to diagram them as they're presented. So F, more productive than G. So F has to, what that means is F has to come before G on this diagram. F has to be to the left of G. So the way we do that is this. F goes before G. The next rule is R is more productive than S. Now that's a separate rule, different variables, so I'm just going to write it separately like that. The next rule is that R is more productive than T. Now I already have R before S. I can bring the T in there without writing it all over again. And here's how you do it. R is before both S and T. S is more productive than H. Well, I have the S already, so I'm going to add the H to that. So it looks like that. And then the next rule, G more productive than T. Well, that means I now am able to sort of combine this rule, the FG thing, with this big structure. G has to be in front of the T, so that means the F and the G have to be in front of the T. So I'm going to move that over. I'm going to put F, G, T, and I'm going to erase what I had written before. And this is now my diagram for this game. And this tells me a lot. This gives me a lot of relationships between the variables, and you just have to learn how to read it properly. F is before G, G is before T. F is not connected to R, G is not connected to R. Very important to understand that. But R has to be before S, T, and H. So this is a little bit different kind of game than I showed you just a couple minutes ago. And number 13 is just like the first question in the game I did before. It's a solution to the game. I would just go through my rules one by one, knock stuff out. 14 is a diagrammable question like in the other game, except now I'm making some kind of ordering diagram. So I'm going to do what they tell me to do, which is to put F third. Now, if F is third, what can we figure out? And I wish I could hear some of you. Some of you might have some ideas about what to do with it. What I know from my rules, is that G and T have to be after F. But do I know where to put them? Well, not exactly. Not exactly. I mean, they could be right after the F, but they could be at the end, or one could be here and maybe one could be there. I don't know. So it's a little uncertain. So I'm going to just do something like this. Remember, I used parentheses before. Comes in very handy. It's very useful to use parentheses because that, again, it means that, well, I don't know exactly who goes where, but this is what I have to have in these spaces. I have to have the G before the T. I know that. Now, what is left is this whole RSTH thing. And if you get good at it, you ought to, hopefully, you can start to like figure out what to do with that. If R has to have these three things after it, there's no way that R can go over here. In fact, R actually has to be first because everything else has to be after R. Everything that's left has to be after R. So R is going to have to go first. And S is going to have to come after it. And S is going to have to go second. Because H has to come after S. So H is going to go down at the end somewhere. But where does it go? Well, you know what? I don't know. It's going to be somewhere in those last three spots. But H is not related to the G and the T. So I'm just going to throw like a little H in a bubble floating around among these guys. H can go, that means H can go in any of these spaces. So that's kind of how we want to try to tackle some games. And that means I can get the answer now. Which of the following could be true? Could G be second? Definitely not. Could H be fourth? Sure, H could be fourth. H could go right in there. G and T could be the last two. So that is a little taste of some games action. What do you think, Francis?
So, Jeff, just to close, can you give some of your best advice for people who are navigating the journey?
Well, in terms of navigating the journey, you have decided they want to go to law school and trying to figure out what to do.
They're like 17, 18, because that happens to be the bulk of the group that we have, right? 15, 16, 17. And they've decided they want to go to law school.
Okay.
So can you give some really good closing advice? And for those of you who found this helpful, honestly, I want to just say thank you, Jeff. Thank you for doing this from the kindness of your heart. So Jeff, let's start with this. Can you just give some really good heartfelt advice, closing remarks? Go ahead.
So what I mentioned, the one thing I mentioned before that I really truly believe, and you should take it to heart. Do not think that if you want to go to law school, you have to take specific courses in college. You should really find something that you are passionate about, something you enjoy academically. If you enjoy it, you're probably going to get better grades. They love good grades. It doesn't really matter what the major is. It's going to impress law schools. And if you are passionate about what you're doing in college, that will come through on your transcript. They're going to see this amazing stuff on your transcript, and you end up, you may have a lot to say about it in your personal statement. So academically, there is no specific sort of guidance that I would say you must do to go to law school. Find something you really like as much as you possibly can. Now, in terms of other things, though, that are important and helpful for going to law school, they do like people that are community-minded. So, and colleges do this, like this too, of course. Volunteering, helping with the community is always a positive thing if you're able to do it, if you have the time to do it. Not everybody has the time. A lot of people might need to be working while they're in college. There's a lot of different reasons that you might not be able to do sort of selfless work like that. But if you're able to, it's a big positive. You certainly don't have to work in a law firm first. It doesn't have to be on your resume that you were like a paralegal at a law firm or anything like that. That being said, there's nothing wrong with trying to find that kind of job to sort of see what you think about law, see what you encounter in law in a firm. And a lot of firms do lots of different things, but a personal statement, actually a very successful personal statement that I worked on this past year, was someone who she worked at a law firm that specialized in labor law, and they were helping the employees that were having bad things happen to them, unfair practices, things like that. And they were representing the employees, and she was very affected by some of the cases that they worked on. There were some very sort of personal situations, personal matters with some of their clients, and she wrote about that in her personal statement. And that was not only a great personal statement, but it also really affected her desire to go to law school. It gave her like a sense of direction and purpose that she didn't necessarily have. But she knew she wanted to go to law school, but she really felt strong about this particular area of law because she worked in a firm. So there are good reasons to sort of try to get jobs like that. So volunteer work and jobs that not all. It's not it's not like, oh, I worked at a law firm, that's going to impress the law schools. It's what you do with it. If you're able to say some really meaningful things, and that talk about how it affected you personally in terms of your choices, in terms of like your goals, things like that, then those kinds of jobs really can be very helpful in terms of going to law school. But not because it was a law firm job, but because you took that opportunity and did something with it. And law schools love to see stuff like that. So anytime you have the opportunity to sort of take the initiative with your own sort of academics and your own career, and even if it's just the idea of trying something new that you haven't tried before, that's a big plus. Law schools love students that are very diverse in lots of different ways, diverse experiences. So that's something I would absolutely recommend. And it may be a little frightening to think about it if you're a sophomore or junior in high school, but do try to keep it in mind as you go forward. Think of things that might be meaningful, might be fun, and might help you decide like where you eventually would like to end up. There's a lot of different ways, a lot of different kinds of jobs that can do that, but I would definitely recommend trying your best to come up with something like that. Any other questions, Francis?
No, I think we can all give you a huge thank you. You covered so much information. I just want to give everyone, please type a nice, big, huge thank you to Jeff for his time, his effort, his energy. And I just want to kind of close by saying that at Queller, we run LSAT classes. So we run them once a week during the spring, during the fall, and then over the summer it's 4 days a week, 4 hours a day. If you guys are able to leave a nice review, I think it's also really helpful because it helps build the brand. And we read the reviews, and we obviously look back on the Queller website for these moments. So if you're able to definitely share, that it's as being in light of what's going on with COVID, online reviews are actually really important to the business and the company, especially lately, since we're not able to go into schools in person. So I'm just going to type a link really fast. And while I'm typing the link, I just want to let everyone know that Jeff was an amazing teacher at Queller Prep in person. He's fully vaccinated. Is that correct, Jeff? Am
That
I
is
right?
correct. Absolutely correct. Yes.
He's fully vaccinated. He is teaching in-person classes. He also teaches privately one-on-one. And if you want to, connect and have lessons, Jeff is absolutely available as a teacher and as an instructor for you privately, or he teaches the class. I want to tell you that the summer that when Jeff taught the in-person class, we had 12 kids. Every single one is in law school today. So isn't that amazing? Every single one. So I'm really glad that, you were there because you really mentored them
And it's always
in
my
many ways.
pleasure. Always my pleasure. I always love meeting new students, that are have those kinds of goals, and I love helping them out with that.
Yeah, I think that's so extremely important. So I'm posting the link if you guys are able to. I think it would be really great if you're able to just do a quick, mention that, Color webinar and that we are running the LSAT. And it's also a good, way to compliment Jeff. as you're doing that. And then the last but not least, I really enjoy taking everyone off mute just to give Jeff a huge thank you, which you totally deserve. You worked so hard with us. So I'm going to take everyone quickly off mute, and we're going to say thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice sort of meeting you all, and I hope
Jeff,
to see
it really,
some of
really
you again.
means a lot that you did this.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. And remember, if you have friends who want to do the Queller LSAT program, it would really be great if we got a group together. We're really fighting hard to keep Queller as an in-person amazing tutoring center. So please, help us succeed in that endeavor. All right. It means a lot. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Have a great, great night. Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you
Everybody
so
stay
much.
healthy and safe.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Thanks, guys. Bye.